worked in the energy sector since 2009, managing hydrogeological, gee, that's quite a mouthful, projects in Canada and the United States. He incorporated Prairie Lithium in 2019, which is now the largest active lithium brine developer in its project region. I will now turn things over to Zach.
Awesome. Well, I just want to start off by saying thank you to everybody for coming out here today. It's really a pleasure to have you all here and learn more about lithium in Saskatchewan. I think it's important to note that not only did we just conclude drilling one of the first lithium brine wells in Canada, but in that well we also discovered some of the highest lithium concentrations that I've ever seen in Canada. So it's certainly an exciting time for lithium here in Saskatchewan. And while drilling that well, we were able to support over 100 different jobs in the Weyburn and Estevan area from over 40 different companies. So with lithium, we have the opportunity to not just support the current oil and gas service jobs in the region, but also create new ones and attract other disciplines to Saskatchewan. None of this would be possible without the support that we've received from the provincial government here in Saskatchewan and their innovation incentives. So we look forward to what the future holds for lithium in Saskatchewan, and thank you for coming today.
Okay, don't know if there are any questions. Brian?
There's often been incentives for horizontal drilling, for enhanced oil recovery. We may see something about helium soon. Are we going to see anything regarding lithium specifically targeted to that sector?
Well, lithium has qualified, as Zach mentioned or referenced, and as I did as well, under the Saskatchewan Petroleum Investment Incentive. And basically, there are two key incentives on the books on the energy and resources side. One is that one, SPI is the acronym, and the other one is infrastructural, the Oil and Gas Petroleum Investment Incentive. So one R&D, one infrastructural. The key thing about the incentives that we have on the books in that space, in energy and resources, is that government money follows. It doesn't lead. And so when you see a project such as this and the extraction prototypes that are proposed, obviously leads to very, very tangible things that where we're standing today, and that's evidence of the success of an R&D innovation value add incentives such as the Saskatchewan Petroleum Investment Incentive. As I say, we also have infrastructural ones on the books, again, $10 million minimum investment, and so on. And they're based around transferable royalty credits. Some of these emerging areas don't have a royalty structure in place. Obviously, we're at a very prototype level here. And so where you have the option around transferable royalty credits, certainly we're told by the sector that these have been very common sense, efficient ways of driving investment and exploration technologies, new technologies, because you have that option to use it as a transferable, almost monetary, tool. And so that's how those two are structured. You referenced others. I mean, they're much more established. Around enhanced oil recovery, for example, horizontal wells, that's around, production, and that's obviously led to, millions and millions of dollars in investment for the province. But these are, for the Saskatchewan Petroleum Investment Incentive, where we're pre-royalty, it's much more about encouraging R&D.
You had referenced like a Saskatchewan Subsurface Geological Laboratory, or the Saskatchewan Geological Survey. I heard a story in 2013 where they were talking about lithium. They said, look, there could be a huge market for this and the price could triple by 2020, which it did. So can you talk a little bit about how forward thinking the work that the government has been doing on this long before it's actually started showing up in the field?
Well, that's why I said that Saskatchewan Geological Survey, and I know I highlighted them on a tour a couple of years ago. I think it was just before we went into COVID. I mean, it is an incredible structure that we have going through, in terms of SGS, as it's known, through Energy and Resources. And as I said in my remarks, it is where science meets the sector. There are cores that I think if you lined them all up, core samples, they'd go all the way to L'Orange. The SGS does amazing work. They're highly regarded. And everywhere I go, and when I speak to members of the sector, they talk about the amazing groundbreaking work that SGS has done, and as I say, duly remarked upon and duly credited to them in terms of the work they did. For example, around lithium, several years ago, they identified where a lot of the high concentrations of lithium are, and we know that they're in that Duperow Foundation primarily is where we're really seeing the highest concentrations of it, is in that southeast area. That's down to SGS. They identified this early on and really, have tried to get things moving, for a number of years now, and getting the word out to the sector. And clearly, that's why we're here today is because of those real relationships between the Saskatchewan Geological Survey and the sector. And as is always said about SGS, they walk the rocks. It's a science-based really approach to identifying where concentrations of up and coming and existing formations are for all kinds of areas, including these emerging areas that we're seeing in the province.
How far do you think that a growing lithium sector can go towards replacing oil and gas jobs as part of an energy transition?
Well, I think that's why it's so important to emphasize this building on strengths. And I think, obviously Zach is a true testament to that, energy worker and now, so keenly leading of this emerging sector. It's never about replacing, it's about complementing. And in this case, we've had 100 workers during, some of the work that Zach and Prairie Lithium have done recently, working from 40 companies. And again, these are workers, energy workers in the province who are obviously well acquainted with how wells work. And so there's so much complement between existing and emerging. And I think that's really what this highlights, that we've got so many areas now, whether it's lithium, helium, and Brian mentioned, we'll be hearing more about that, hydrogen potential, where really existing workers can cross over and dovetail on emerging areas. And that's really the important thing. Obviously, to never take our eye off diversification and where we're going from here, but also to never turn our back on our existing sector, because the existing sector is building a new evolution in energy.
Some might see a contradiction between the sort of proactive incentives that you put in place to encourage the industry, but you call it a fee, some call it a tax on EVs in the province, the sort of end state that this product is ultimately going to be used for. How would you respond to that?
Well, first of all, the lithium sector and global demand for lithium is much larger than who is driving on the roads in Saskatchewan, and that's really all that was about, is just in terms of a fair approach to road use. But in terms of the global sector, and I referenced some of the numbers in my remarks, five-fold global demand increase by 2030, and really putting Saskatchewan on the map. Zach mentioned some of the high concentrations, highest he's seen, are here in the province. Right now we have 95% of lithium produced in the world elsewhere, Argentina, Chile, China, and so on. And we have an opportunity to put ourselves in the forefront here in that global conversation. And all roads lead to Sparks, Nevada, for a reason, and you'll see that sign, because obviously lithium plays a big role in the EV sector, portable electronic, medication, all kinds of things. But if we can position Saskatchewan for the future and for growing demand in these growing areas, of course we're all in, and that's what Prairie Lithium is highlighting, and that's what we want to be a part of, obviously.
I have a clarification question. So in the media release, it says that the government could projects 10% growth in demand of lithium. I don't know in what time range, but my question is 10% of what?
Well, I believe that's 10% of global demand. I have to look at the exact news release, and while certainly we're happy to do that. In terms of global demand, I know we're looking at fivefold global by 2030, and you know that there are a number of numbers there that will certainly that are highlighting what we're seeing and from where. But certainly we're seeing price increases, spot price for lithium right now, higher than it's really ever been, really capitalizing on where the whole world sees this conversation. So anyway, certainly happy to clarify the 10%.
For sure. And then just on the incentives, first of all, with the petroleum incentive, what percentage is that? And Zach, how much money do you stand to save?
Perhaps I'll let Zach talk to a bit of that and how Saskatchewan Petroleum Investment Incentive worked for Prairie Lithium, because I know he wants to speak to you all after.
Have we done some kind of assessment of the overall sort of potential of this industry here in the province? How large do you think it could grow? How large are our reserves? How many jobs could it ultimately support if prices continue to grow in the way you expect?
Right. Well, I mean, right now, of course, with Prairie Lithium, we're seeing, a prototype model that is on speed. And I know that there are there's other interest in the sector in terms of subsurface dispositions having been, obtained, but not, at a drilling level yet. So potential is huge. And obviously for value add, and I've referenced some of that in terms of where we see this going. But there's enormous potential in terms of signals that we're getting from the sector around subsurface disposition, interest, exploration, and of course all of that. I mean, prototypes, especially where we're seeing the success and the concentrations we're seeing here, they lead to jobs.
But you couldn't put any numbers or anything on it as far as what you're expecting or forecasting?
Well, probably Zach will be better placed because of this is the first of its kind here in the province, and as I say, 100 jobs just where we've got to get to where we've got now, 40 companies involved in to this point, and where we go from here. Of course, the sky really is the limit, and again, obviously sector interest. Prairie Lithium's here for a reason, and that's all good in terms of prospects for jobs in this province.
Were those 100 jobs temporary?
I'll let Zach speak to that.
How far are you as a ministry in sorting out the hierarchy of who gets what's rights? Because one of the processes Prairie Lithium is looking at is extracting from oil field brines. But those brines don't come to the surface unless the oil company produces it. An older oil well might produce 97% water. Who actually has priority of rights? The oil company, the lithium company? If the oil company is producing water anyhow, do they have to give access to the lithium company? Where is the province in sorting these things out? Well,
that's a highly, that of course goes to the regulatory aspect of the Ministry of Energy and Resources, and that's the work that we're involved in every day. And I know most recently around the DEEP project, and you'll have heard about that. Their agreement with Prairie Lithium really goes to depth considerations, and it was a very positive agreement because there's a working together in terms of that ownership. But it's a good question because it's a very important one around, in even some emerging areas, pore space. We've heard about that in the CCUS space. Obviously, in this space, different depth, different ownership, different claims in terms of titles and so on. That really does go to mineral disposition ownership, and that, the ministry is very, very involved in looking at and regulating as some of these new areas move forward.
What's going to mean for the province to have all of these different subsectors of the larger mineral sector working together in order to diversify even more than we have?
And sorry, what was the first part of the question?
What does it mean to the province for this?
Right. Well, I guess what it means to the province is building on strengths that we already have. And again, I think that the beautiful, I called it beautiful irony, but it is also a beautiful symbolism that it is in oil field brine that we are finding lithium in these degrees of concentration based on all the scientific work that goes into establishing that. Because keep in mind, around the world and even in Canada, the lithium extracted right now is in hard rock, in ore oxide. It's a very different process than in this salt water, this salt oil field brine, and really a much more environmentally friendly process, as this technology develops. But it really is developing, and that's why prototypes such as this are so important, because this oil field brine extraction method is so new around the world. It's much different in other places, in terms of lithium extraction that we see. And in terms of what it means, it is really a matter of building on the energy working strengths that we have, the expertise that the energy sector has. It complements so beautifully on the traditional sector, and certainly I know some of the work that Prairie Lithium did and that Zach did involved Whitecap Energy, for example, in the southeast. Obviously a leader in carbon capture, utilization, and storage, but everyone, the sector is very all in on these diversifications that we're seeing, these building and complementing on strengths that we're seeing. It's not a proprietary issue so much as a complementary one. I mean, where you have oil field brine found as a byproduct, that doesn't hurt anyone. That just helps us all get stronger, as a sector.
One more question, guys, or if we're done, we can start our media one-on-one.
Okay.
Yeah, so what would you say to some of the environmentalists who are concerned about extracting lithium from Saskatchewan's oil field brine?
I would say that oil field brine is one of the greenest ways of extracting lithium out there. If you look at how 95% of lithium is extracted around the world, it's in, as I say, hard rock ore oxide, and it's a byproduct of oil field brine. It's an amazing sustainable use of the well, and it builds electric vehicles and helps to bring those about around the world. How much better can you get in terms of a sustainability story and in terms of feeding the new economy from oil field brine? I don't think you can get any better than that.
So happy to take any questions now or expand on any of the questions that you did have.
Yeah, just to start off, there's been a lot of reporting on lithium extraction. I think the big one is in Tibet, where the water river systems get poisoned. I understand your method is quite different than obviously the dramatic. Can you explain how it works and what makes it sustainable?
Yeah, so how it works is conventional oil and gas pumping process. So we drill down to the brine underground, produce the fluid at the surface, and then in order to get the lithium out of the brine, we use a conventional ion exchange material. So we swap a different ion for the lithium in the brine with an ion in the ion exchange material, and then the lithium-free brine can go back down underground. So in terms of sustainability, it's obviously at the forefront of the transition to electric vehicles. What we're really focused on is, number one, reducing the land use associated with lithium mining. Number two, reducing the freshwater intensity and reducing waste generation, and then obviously being very cognizant of our CO2 intensity as well.
Approximately how many times can, say, 100 liters of brine be recycled and reused before you have to stop using it?
So we use brine only once. So we pull it up out of the ground, pull the lithium out, and then you put it back underground with no lithium in it. So we don't recycle it.
Was this process developed specifically to be kind of greener, more sustainable, or did you develop the process in point that?
No, we definitely develop the process with sustainability in mind. Again, just if the goal is to decarbonize transport through electrification, everybody has to be very cognizant of the materials going into those vehicles and how those materials were mined in the world. So again, really focused on reducing those 4 things that I mentioned earlier.
Do you have to use any fresh water during this process, or is it free of any freshwater usage, or?
You do use water, whether it's fresh or brackish. We have the opportunity here in Saskatchewan, again, just based on the hydrogeology of our basin, to produce a brackish water, use a reverse osmosis to make an RO water, they call it. And we can use that RO water in our process as opposed to drilling into a freshwater aquifer that would potentially interfere with anything at surface.
And just a few factual things. When did you start, when did you extract your first bit of lithium, and how much are you able to produce on, say, a weekly, monthly, annual basis?
Yeah, so we started our extraction tests in test tubes and beakers, very lab scale. That was in January of 2020. From there, we really focused on scaling up the chemistry and the process for total proof of concept. And in terms of production capacity, you're looking at it right now. So we drilled the well to de-risk the resource, prove out the resource, and then we can haul some of that lithium-enriched brine back to this facility for further testing at a larger scale.
And then once you're fully scaled up, what will be the capacity?
So we're actively working to quantify what those economics and what the resource potential is going to be, but I'm not going to disclose anything on that right now.
So how long do you think it'll take to be able to kind of scale up and get to that point?
Scale up, we can anticipate between 24 and 48 months.
I guess that kind of goes to my question here is, what is the horizon for the next few years? What do you see happening?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we just drilled the first well. So now we're actively working to interpret that data, quantify the resource, and then put the best resource development plan in place so that when we do expand, it's been methodical and we're ready to go. So the next plans are really interpreting the data, both resource-wise and process-wise, to build out that ultimate development plan for the future.
The minister was talking about jobs, and on the release it says 100 jobs when you were drilling, so those are temporary jobs?
Those are temporary jobs associated with drilling the wells, yeah.
And when you scale up, are you anticipating having temporary jobs at projects, or is it going to be jobs that are permanent and you will perform?
There will be permanent jobs associated with operating the facilities and operating corporate operations, but there will also be a lot of temporary and service jobs associated with the well workovers and the pipelining and the electrical and the mechanical. So we're going to draw on the same talent pool as the oil and gas industry to service our operations in the same manner.
I don't think you'll put any numbers on that.
Again, right now, until we quantify the next phase of development, we can't quantify the amount of temporary and full-time jobs.
Can you just talk to us, the two incentive programs you're getting, how do they work? How much money are you saving with each one?
Yeah, so for the Saskatchewan Advantage Innovation Fund, that program is an application program where you have to be developing typically a novel technology in Saskatchewan for use in Saskatchewan. So for that program, it's non-dilutive funding support based on the project hitting milestones. And then with the Saskatchewan Petroleum Innovation Incentive, that is based on percentage of eligible capital and operating costs put into the project. So you submit your eligible costs and you get a percentage of that back in the form of royalty credits.
How much is the percentage?
The percentage for the SPY program is 25% back on eligible funds.
And what's the value of the project that you're applying it to?
The value of the project that we applied it to in the past was $1 million.
Okay, guys, one more for Zach, or are you good?
I have one more too. Would this have been feasible for you without those incentives? Like how far did those incentives go in changing the business case for this project?
Those incentives were incredibly important for us. As I mentioned, in January 2020 is when we just started extracting lithium. We were a shop of 2 people. We didn't have a lot of cash flowing into the business, if any. So to receive those grants in 2020 when COVID hit, really ultimately put the project onto the trajectory it is. It allowed us to work through what happened with the global pandemic so that we can continue to build this project here in the province.
You can talk to Zach after, because you're going to see him on the third.
He's at the mic now.
Yeah, okay. Well, we said one more.
Just, you asked Mr. Velosky as well, what do you think the potential is for this industry as mining in Saskatchewan?
I think, and again, I'm a scientist, so I like to quantify things first before I answer them. I think the potential it's large, but I'm not going to put it into context quite yet until we finish the necessary steps to quantifying the resource and the process and the economics. But it is a large potential for Southeast Saskatchewan.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.